Here we are allowing our psychology to overpower the evidence. Could that be the case when it comes to belief in God? Sure it could. This is why James says, he who continues to doubt is tossed to and fro as if you're on a ship in a storm.
The clip we're about to watch is a very real and vulnerable conversation between Dr. Frank Turek, a very famous apologist, and one of the students that came to his lectures. The interesting thing is this student used to be a Christian and now describes themselves as agnostic. I believe the young man in this video comes with good intent and is really trying to understand things. I still believe that there's one missing link to bridge the gap between understanding truth and believing in God. I'll give my thoughts on that after this clip.
My question is, have you heard of the problem of divine hiddenness?
Yes.
I guess as background, problem of divine hiddenness is essentially a person who is a non-resistant non-believer, somebody who would answer the question that you proposed. If God did exist and you knew it, would you believe in him and serve him? The answer to that would be yes, but they cannot find themselves convinced that he does, no matter how hard they try.
Sure.
I would count myself among that number. I was raised Christian church, Christian school, very Christian community, and yet I find myself a fairly confirmed agnostic, despite quite a bit of research. So how do you reconcile a omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God who desires a relationship with his creation, not being able to, well, okay, maybe that presupposes, but it appears to me that there should be no barrier that I would be able to place in my own heart that an omnipotent God would not be able to surmount. And the fact that he has the desire to surmount any barrier, it seems hard to reconcile. How would you reconcile that?
Okay, yeah, good question. Snellenberg has written much on this, the hiddenness of God. There are many different ways to address this issue, but let me just take one or two ways. It could be that God doesn't want you to become a believer right now. Let me give you an example of someone very prominent. There's a friend of mine who lives in Nebraska he's a Christian apologist, and he had another friend that wasn't a Christian, and he wanted this guy to be a Christian, so he actually gave him my book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And the guy said, I'm not reading that. That was written by a Christian. Well, yeah, of course, a Christian believes it, so he's going to write it. But they lost touch. 10 years later, my friend sees this guy, and he's a Christian. And he goes, what happened? He goes, I've been watching Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson led me to Jesus. Jordan Peterson's not a Christian. And the reason that he's been watching Jordan Peterson is because he considered Jordan Peterson kind of an honest broker. Like he doesn't have a horse in this race. He's just trying to find the truth himself. And Jordan Peterson, being a non-Christian, helped lead this guy to Jesus when a Christian couldn't do it. So it's possible that maybe you're in that same position. Maybe you have people in your life and your circle of influence is going to expand, maybe years from now, to the point that it's big enough where God goes, okay. What's your name again? Luke. Luke, you're ready now. Now, I'm going to reveal more of myself to you, and now you're going to be able to influence these other people in your circle that wouldn't have been there if you had become a Christian 10 years ago. That's a possibility. Yeah.
The problem I found is that, I get much the same answer from a lot of my Christian friends who I've talked to is, God works in his own time. Many years from now, you could be a Christian. The problem I find with that is, all it takes is one person who is in my circumstance, who goes to their grave without finding the truth and love of Christ, for that to seemingly fall apart.
Okay, Luke, I'm not saying this is the case with you, but I'm saying it's the case in general with humanity. We all have a deceitful heart. We might not even know why we do half the things we do. We might say we're completely open, and in the recesses of our hearts, we're not. There's something between us and the truth, and we don't really want to accept the truth. In fact, let me ask you this. According to what you believe, is your objection to Christianity evidence-based or something else?
It's an interesting question. I'd say it was probably primarily evidence-based, but in more recent reflection, it's kind of occurred to me that you can't talk somebody into the faith no more than you can talk somebody out of it. That kind of has to be a more deeply felt spiritual realization. And I have all of these kind of arguments rolling around in my head and tons of research I've done, but ultimately it appears to me that I would just have to have had an experience of God. And it's crazy because, I grew up in the exact circumstances where that should have happened, and it was happening to everyone around me, and yet I got nothing. Or maybe I don't know, maybe I did get something and I didn't see it, but if I was meant to see it, I would have, I suppose.
Yeah, perhaps, or maybe it hasn't happened yet. Jesus says, keep knocking, keep seeking. Sometimes the process of becoming a Christian is necessary to make you a deeper person when you become a Christian. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're going through these doubts and these struggles because 5 years from now you're going to become a Christian, and then you're going to have a ministry to people who go through doubts and struggles. So just to say that God, you haven't shown me yet, so you must not exist, mm-hmm. is very presumptuous.
Sure.
Okay? God does work on his own time. Mm-hmm. And he's working through people like Jordan Peterson, even though Jordan Peterson, at least to this point, is not a Christian, and maybe God doesn't want him to be a Christian just yet. So I would say just be open, keep seeking. And let me say one other thing about this. Your psychology, my psychology, is not going to tell us what's true outside of our skull. Mm-hmm. Our psychology can deceive us. In fact, our psychology is such that we'll actually ignore evidence for irrational reasons. Let me give you an example. There are probably people in this room that cannot get on an airplane. You're scared to death to get on an airplane. Yet you know from an evidence perspective, the safest way to get anywhere is on an airplane. You should be more afraid to get in your car than to get on an airplane, because statistically, aviation is the safest way to get anywhere. Here we are allowing our psychology to overpower the evidence. Mm-hmm. Could that be the case when it comes to belief in God? Sure it could. This is why James says, he who continues to doubt is tossed to and fro as if you're on a ship in a storm. And C.S. Lewis writes pretty profoundly on this. Have you read Mere Christianity? Mm-hmm. He writes pretty profoundly on this when he says, there were times when I was an atheist where Christianity just looked all too true. And then there have been times when I've been a Christian when I had such severe doubts. And he said that's where faith comes in, meaning trust, not blind faith. After you've established through reason that Christianity is true, you need to tell your doubts to get off, because you've already established that it's true by looking at the evidence. And the evidence doesn't change. Your psychology can change with the weather, or the bad pizza you had earlier today, or the fact that your favorite football team, the Dallas Cowboys, lost, right? Thankfully again. Your psychology will not necessarily tell you what's true about what's outside your skull. The evidence will. That's why you got to concentrate on the evidence.
I really respect where the student's coming from, and I feel for him. And I love how earnest he was in asking his questions. You could tell and see that he was really wrestling with these things and trying to understand it. But I believe that Frank's right. When he was talking about the psychology of things and he attached it to the scripture in James, he was essentially saying we can't stay there in this wrestling match with God. When the evidence points to the truth, that's when we need to accept it. And that's sometimes the hardest thing, because the greatest weapon that Satan has against us is deception. How often are you in your own head thinking, is this God talking to me? Is this my own desires getting in the way? Is this Satan trying to deceive me? That's where I would encourage y'all to ask God to center your minds and help you to focus on his voice and being able to discern that. But the hardest part of that is you have to remain still and silent. And ultimately, I believe the best way for us to hear God's voice is to read the scriptures. I believe that's the biggest way he talks to us. If you're someone that's like this student and you're not sure if God's real, but you really do want to know, I would encourage you, continue searching for the truth and look into the evidence. And when you feel like the evidence has pointed towards a conclusion, go with it. And at the end of the day, if you're a Christian and you're somebody that has been trying to understand what God's plan is for you, or you've really been wrestling through a storm that you're personally going through, stay disciplined in your faith. It's at those moments where life is hardest, where we have to stay most disciplined. And that means talk to God daily, as often and as much as you can. Dive into his word. Read scriptures. That's how he's going to talk to you and reveal himself. Surround yourself with other believers. Seek their wisdom. God can use others to be a vessel for his own wisdom. No matter what side of the coin you're on, I want to thank you so much for watching this clip. And I want to ask for a quick favor. If you're new to the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. We're a small channel with the mission of surrounding seekers and believers with God's word so that we can all answer these eternally important questions as I continue to compile content that answers some of life's hardest questions. Thank you so much for joining, and my prayer is that you're blessed in your week. I'll see you on the next one.